Imagine discovering that the person you trusted most, who seemed to be the perfect image of love and safety, harbors a secret so dark it challenges everything you believe to be true. In a world where appearances can deceive, it's easy to be seduced by facades. But the truth, no matter how shocking, always finds a way to emerge. What if I told you that behind a charming smile, there could be an abyss of hidden intentions? Would you believe it? Get ready to dive into a story where everything you thought you knew will be turned upside down, revealing a side of human nature that few dare to confront. Gretchen Anthony was a beacon of light, always bringing joy to those around her with her radiant smile and vibrant personality. At 51, she was the picture of health and vitality, regularly working out and dedicating much of her time to lovingly raising her 12-year-old daughter. Living in Jupiter, Florida, she had overcome a difficult divorce and, to her surprise, found a new chance at love with David Anthony, a charming and charismatic fitness instructor known for his magnetic personality. Their union seemed like the definition of a modern fairy tale, at least in the eyes of everyone who knew them. David Anthony was an imposing man, with considerable height and a charming smile that easily won over everyone around him. When he and Gretchen met at the local gym, the magnetism between them was immediate and undeniable. David, with his captivating personality and striking presence, quickly became an important figure in Gretchen's and her daughter's lives. In no time, the couple was married, and the life they shared seemed perfect, with David taking on the role of a dedicated stepfather, referring to Gretchen's daughter as his bonus daughter. However, as with many fairy tales, reality proved to be less enchanting over time. In 2019, the relationship between Gretchen and David began to show signs of strain. The arguments became frequent, and the tension between them grew unbearable. Eventually, they decided to separate, with David moving out of the home they shared. Determined to protect her daughter and herself, Gretchen installed security cameras in her home, fearing that David might return unexpectedly. This precaution would prove crucial in the unfolding events. Despite the separation, Gretchen tried to maintain as normal a life as possible for her daughter. She continued to work, exercise, and care for her home, always keeping a positive attitude despite the emotional turmoil. However, her closest friends noticed that something was different. Gretchen seemed more worried, more reserved, as if she was carrying a burden she didn't want to share with anyone. Even so, she didn't openly discuss her fears, preferring to focus on moving forward. The community around Gretchen, who always saw her as a strong and resilient person, had no idea what was coming. The relationship with David, which once seemed so perfect, had become a source of fear and uncertainty. But no one could have predicted the horror that would unfold in the following months when the COVID-19 pandemic spread across the world, bringing not only a health crisis but also dark revelations about what was really happening in Gretchen's life. It was as if a silent storm was brewing. Welcome to Spooky Stories. I'm Milo, your guide through the chilling and the unknown. Here, we dive into terrifying tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Join our community of thrill seekers, and let's explore the darkness together. If you're curious about how I keep my concentration, efficiency, performance, and mental health at their peak every day, I'm going to share with you 2 resources that I use daily in my video creation routine. First, breathing for sleep. This method is essential for my deep, restful nights, ensuring I wake up refreshed and ready to create high-quality content. And the best part? It's super easy to incorporate into your routine. And then there's the 7 seconds at-home ritual. This ritual is backed by 4 neuroscience studies and helps to supercharge my brain power, keeping my focus sharp throughout the entire day. Want to try these resources and feel the difference in your routine? The links are right here in the video description and pinned in the comments. Don't miss this chance to elevate your productivity and mental well-being. In March 2020, as the world was engulfed in the chaos of the COVID-19 pandemic, Gretchen Anthony sent a worrying message to her friends and family. She informed them that she had contracted the virus and that her condition was severe. "I tested positive for COVID-19," the message read, followed by the statement that she was isolating at home to avoid spreading the disease. The news was met with apprehension by all, but there was no reason to panic yet. After all, the pandemic was taking victims everywhere, and Gretchen's diagnosis seemed just another case among many. Days passed, and Gretchen's messages became increasingly alarming. She reported that her condition had worsened and that, on medical advice, she had been admitted to Jupiter Medical Center for treatment. Gretchen's friends, worried, tried calling her, but their calls went straight to voicemail. The only responses they received were via text, which, though strange, wasn't entirely unusual given the seriousness of the situation. However, concern began to turn into unease when Gretchen mentioned that she had been transferred to a special CDC center in Belle Glade, Florida, for more advanced treatment. This seemingly innocuous detail piqued the curiosity of her friends. Belle Glade was a small town, and no one had heard of a CDC center there. They decided to investigate but found no information about the existence of such a facility. This initial discovery made Gretchen's friends begin to question the authenticity of the messages. As Gretchen's friends and family tried to make sense of what was happening, they began to notice more inconsistencies. None of them had spoken directly with Gretchen since she sent the first message about her diagnosis. The only communication was through texts, which became increasingly disjointed and worrying. Some friends started to suggest that perhaps it wasn't Gretchen sending the messages. But who could it be and why? Suspicion grew when a close friend attempted to visit Gretchen at her home. He noticed something strange. The house was quiet, and there were no signs of activity. The lights were off and Gretchen's car wasn't in the garage. It was as if she had simply vanished. Concerned, the friend decided to contact the police, explaining the situation and requesting a welfare check on Gretchen. What he didn't know was that this simple request would trigger an investigation that would reveal a horrific crime. When Jupiter police arrived at Gretchen's house, they found the garage door locked and a strong smell of cleaning products emanating from inside. Forcing their way in, they discovered With the disturbing evidence found at Gretchen's home, Jupiter police knew they were dealing with something far more serious than initially imagined. The first task for investigators was to locate David Anthony, Gretchen's ex-husband. Since the separation, David had moved into his mother's house, but now he was missing too. Authorities began to suspect that David might be involved in Gretchen's disappearance, but they needed more evidence before taking action. As the investigation progressed, the police decided to check Jupiter Medical Center, where Gretchen was supposedly admitted. To the investigators' surprise, the hospital had no record of Gretchen as a patient. This shocking discovery turned the suspicions of her friends and family into a tangible fear. Someone was lying about Gretchen's whereabouts, and she could be in real danger. At this point, investigators were certain that the text messages sent from Gretchen's phone were fake, possibly sent by someone trying to cover up a crime. But who could be behind this? Security cameras at the hospital, where Gretchen's car was found abandoned, captured a tall, hooded figure leaving the vehicle. The description matched David Anthony, and now he was the prime suspect in Gretchen's disappearance. The police intensified the search for David, trying to track his whereabouts. Knowing he might be on the run, they began monitoring his cell phone and credit card activity. The clues led investigators to several pawn shops, where David had tried to sell Gretchen's jewelry, claiming it had belonged to a family member who had died of COVID-19. Each new discovery deepened the mystery and confirmed the investigators' suspicions. David was involved in Gretchen's disappearance somehow. Meanwhile, Gretchen's friends and family were in a state of panic. The idea that she might be in danger and that David, the man she once loved, could be involved was terrifying. With each passing day without news, the desperation grew. The police, now convinced that Gretchen had fallen victim to a crime, redoubled their efforts to locate David and uncover the truth. But time was running out, and the chances of finding Gretchen alive were diminishing by the minute. As the The pursuit of David Anthony intensified as authorities realized that time was of the essence. With each passing day, the possibility of finding Gretchen alive diminished, and the pressure to capture David before he disappeared completely was immense. Using every tool at their disposal, investigators tracked his cell phone signals and financial activities while trying to anticipate his next moves. The clues led the police on a winding trail across Florida, where David seemed to always be one step ahead. He had left a trail of suspicious transactions at pawn shops and gas stations, and investigators discovered he was heading west, possibly toward the border. The urgency of the situation was clear. If David crossed into Mexico or any other country, retrieving him would become an extremely difficult task. Meanwhile, Gretchen's friends and family were living a nightmare. The news that David was on the run only heightened their despair, and the community in Jupiter rallied around them, doing everything they could to assist in the search for answers. Gretchen's disappearance had become the main topic of conversation in the town, with everyone on high alert for any detail that might help the police locate David and, hopefully, uncover the truth about what had happened to Gretchen. The tension reached its peak when the police tracked David's cell phone to Las Cruces, New Mexico, more than 1,600 miles from Jupiter. With the help of local authorities, they finally managed to locate David and intercept him at a gas station. David was alone except for his dog, Kobe, and he did not resist when the officers approached him. However, he seemed unwilling to cooperate, insisting on his innocence and claiming that Gretchen was still alive. David was taken into custody, and his vehicle was impounded for analysis. Inside the car, investigators found several items belonging to Gretchen, including her cell phone, which raised even more questions about what had really happened. Despite the mounting evidence against him, David maintained his story that Gretchen had fled and that he was trying to protect her from some sort of threat. His disconnected and evasive narrative only deepened the investigators' suspicions. While David was in custody, the police focused on gathering all available evidence to build a solid case against him. The recordings from Gretchen's security cameras, which had been sent for analysis, began to reveal horrifying With David Anthony in custody, investigators finally had the chance to confront him with the evidence they had gathered. They knew that the only way to secure a conviction would be to obtain a confession or, at the very least, discover the whereabouts of Gretchen's body. The evidence against David was damning, but without Gretchen's body, the prosecution faced a significant challenge. The interrogation of David began with a direct approach, but he maintained his cold and distant demeanor, repeatedly denying any involvement in Gretchen's death. The investigators, aware that they were dealing with a manipulative and dangerous man, decided to change tactics. They appealed to David's humanity, talking about the devastating impact Gretchen's disappearance was having on her daughter and family. They tried to touch any remaining shred of empathy he might have, but David remained resolute, insisting that Gretchen was alive and that he had done nothing wrong. The tension in the interrogation room was palpable. The investigators knew David was lying, but without a confession, there were no guarantees of a conviction. They decided to confront him with the irrefutable evidence from the security recordings. When the footage was shown to David, he remained silent for a long time. The recordings clearly showed a man, identified as David, entering Gretchen's home and later dragging her into the garage. Despite the evidence, David continued to stick to his fabricated story. He denied any responsibility, claiming he had been forced to do certain things to protect Gretchen. His lies were obvious to the investigators, but his refusal to cooperate made the process even more exasperating. The frustration among the officers grew with each of David's denials, and they knew they would need more than circumstantial evidence to secure a conviction. Finally, the investigators once again changed their approach, exploring the inconsistencies in David's stories and pressing him with specific questions that he couldn't answer. Gradually, they began to see that, despite his facade of calm, David was starting to unravel. However, even then, he continued to assert that Gretchen was alive, challenging the investigators to prove otherwise. It was then that one of the investigators, in a last-ditch effort, played an audio recording of Gretchen's daughter, pleading to know where her mother was. For a brief moment, David seemed to waver, showing a flicker of emotion. But even in the face of this plea, while David Anthony remained in custody, investigators continued to work tirelessly to solve the mystery of Gretchen's disappearance. The evidence they had collected so far was enough to incriminate him, but without Gretchen's body, the prosecution faced a considerable challenge. They knew that, to ensure justice, they needed to find Gretchen's body and finally offer some closure to her family. As time ran out and the trial approached, the prosecution made one last attempt to negotiate with David. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he would have to confess to Gretchen's murder and reveal where he had hidden her body. David, realizing that this was his last opportunity to negotiate some leniency, finally agreed. On the day of his confession, the air in the courtroom was heavy with anticipation and dread over what he would reveal. David Anthony, with a coldness that shocked everyone present, finally admitted what everyone had already suspected. He confessed to killing Gretchen in her home and transporting her body to a remote location. In a tone that was almost indifferent, he described how he had buried her behind a Walmart, in a deserted area near a retirement home. The location was as unlikely as it was morbid, and David's description made it clear that he had chosen the spot precisely for its obscurity. When investigators went to the location David had described, the silence was oppressive. The overgrown grass and surrounding trees made it a place where no one would ever think to look. However, After several hours of digging, Gretchen's remains were found. The discovery brought a mix of relief and pain to everyone involved. On the one hand, Gretchen's family could finally give her a proper funeral. But on the other, the brutality of her end became all too evident, bringing a new level of horror to those who loved her. David's final revelation and the discovery of Gretchen's body closed one of the darkest chapters of the story, but it left many questions unanswered. During the trial, David remained impassive, never showing any remorse for what he had done. The court sentenced him to 38 years in prison, but for Gretchen's family, no sentence could ever compensate for the devastating loss they had suffered. The community of Jupiter, scarred by this tragedy, remained united in supporting the family, but the trauma of that period would never be forgotten. The case of Gretchen Anthony, which began with the disappearance of a woman during the pandemic, ended with the revelation of an unimaginable betrayal. What Now that you've discovered how appearances can be deceiving and how terrifying reality can be when hidden behind a facade of normalcy, I ask you, what else might be hidden in your own life, waiting to be revealed? Are you prepared to take a closer look, to question what seems obvious, and to seek the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it might be? If this story made you reflect on what we really know about the people around us, it's time to act. How about starting by applying this more attentive and critical perspective to your own daily life? Don't let the next dark secret go unnoticed. If you want to keep uncovering mysteries and delve even deeper into stories that challenge reality, subscribe now to the Spooky Stories channel and turn on notifications. Here, every detail matters, and each new story is an opportunity to learn more about the darkest sides of human nature. Don't miss the next chapter in this intriguing and chilling universe.